Now, National Treasury's reversal of the proposed VAT increase slated to take effect on May the 1st has evoked a whole lot of mixed reaction. This morning, we're speaking to the South African Institute of Taxation, and that's to unpack the implications of this decision for businesses as well as consumers across the nation. What does the sudden change back to the normal amount or the previous amount mean for your pocket and the country's economic outlook? A member of the South African Institute of Taxation, that technical work group, Mabutho Mthembu, joins us now in studio. Baba, thank you so much for the time. Really
thank you very
appreciate
much.
it. Any South African should be celebrating the reversal of that VAT hike ultimately, even businesses. But it feels like it's not all roses. There's still a lot at play that businesses could be on the hook for, even consumers.
Of course, I mean, it's great news for consumers on the basis that obviously the VAT increase would have obviously, elevated the cost of living.
100%.
It would have eroded the disposable income of the normal, South African. So it's great news to be celebrated by a South African. However, this impasse that we have seen from a government point of view in terms of whether they are implementing the VAT or not implementing the VAT increase has created a lot of, uncertainty from a business point of view. The VAT vendors who are registered to collect the VAT on behalf of the government.
Yeah.
Now, some businesses have already implemented processes, right, in order to, in their systems, they've already incurred costs,
yeah,
to implement the VAT. I mean, we are a week away from the 1st of May. Even as we stand, the VAT increase is still implementable from a VAT Act point of view.
Wow.
It still has to be tabled. The revenue laws bill has to be tabled in Parliament because the statement issued yesterday by the minister, it expresses his intent to withdraw the revenue laws bill that he tabled in Parliament.
Sure.
And he has to now reintroduce the new bill without the VAT increase. It has not happened yet. So there is this impasse, and businesses are, in fact, in a quagmire in terms of what will happen going forward.
This is sort of in the middle ground here of trying to understand where exactly they should sit with regards to this, because as you said, it is still implementable by then, the 1st of May, even though the word is ultimately by the 1st of May, everybody should actually not have it in their businesses.
Yeah.
So the concerns then, even for the court case, that out-of-court settlement, that not having been settled yet, could that also then be a way to say, because if the DA continues to fight the ANC and they don't get the right measure, what ultimately could happen? I mean, later on, we're going to speak to John Steenhuisen, the leader of the DA. But just in your assessment, should we not have an agreement there, the impact?
In my view, the court case that obviously, the EFF as well as the DA had instituted in court to reverse the VAT increase would not have had any impact, because the VAT Act grants the minister authority to implement the VAT over a period of 12 months, pending the impasse even in Parliament, even if Parliament has not even approved the VAT rate.
So is this saying that ultimately that even if the DA and the EFF had won that court case, that ultimately it wouldn't have changed anything in the law, or they wouldn't have won the court case?
The court would only have decided on the basis of the procedure.
Yes,
right?
okay.
And that was what the contentious issue that was brought before the court.
Yeah.
But the court would not have withdrawn the minister's announcement of the VAT rate increase. And that's what the Act says. By mere announcement by the minister and giving the effective date of the increase, it means that the VAT rate increase is implementable on the date that is announced by the minister. Man. So what the DA and the EFF brought before the court is the procedure. So if even they won the court case, the VAT rate increase would have still have happened.
It would just have affected future ways in which to deal with an increase of that sort, or dealing with
Of course, it would have been effective for a period of 12 months.
Yes.
And if it's not ratified by Parliament, then it would have been withdrawn.
Yes.
In
Administrative
2025.
nightmare. The administrative nightmare of this is going to be quite massive, one could imagine then. So ultimately, it's all eyes on SARS to effectively raise what looks like about 20 billion rand.
No, of course. I mean, I think the argument has been, I think, by the parties that are anti the VAT rate increase is that there is quite a lot of other avenues that the government should have explored to raise the 20 billion rand instead of increasing the VAT rate by 0.5%, which would have impacted an ordinary South African like myself and yourself, right?
Yeah.
And that's the key argument. And I think it's a fair argument because the government also should have looked at other ways. For instance, there is a whole lot of wasteful expenditure that we see that is reported by the Auditor General year on year. And government should have at least been putting measures in place to ensure that they reduce wasteful expenditure in order to ensure that there is a proper framework to ensure that the government is able to deal with the expenditure issues.
Dealing with these expenditure issues now, though, is going to be even tougher, right? Because you then don't have the money that you said you would get, because the hope was that the VAT increase would be an immediate source of income, as opposed to dealing with trying to crack down on, like you said, wasteful expenditure, bloated government, if you want to add that to the list, etc. Now it's going to be about, there's nothing else that we're looking at, according to what we currently have, except for how much we collect. Which means that we still have the 75 billion rand hole that the finance minister speaks of. Is making sure that SARS has enough capacity to collect going to be the most important thing at this point also?
It is a very important thing. And the commissioner for SARS, in fact, was against the VAT rate increase. I mean, the other point that, has been an issue is on the non-adjustment of the pay-as-you-earn brackets, right? But the commissioner for SARS, in fact, put a proposal to the Treasury that instead of increasing taxes to strain even further the taxpayers who are already burdened, overburdened by the taxes that they pay, rather capacitate the South African Revenue Services to collect more taxes. And the estimate that the commissioner, in fact, presented to the National Treasury was that if they were capacitated to modernize, right, their capacity, their technology infrastructure, etc., and artificial intelligence, they would, in fact, collect even close to 1 trillion, which they are unable to collect on the basis of their incapacity.
Does this show the lack of investment we've had in SARS for quite a number of years then, right?
No, of course. I mean, there was about 7.5 billion, so 7.5 billion, yes, that was sort of committed by the National Treasury to SARS over the period of 2 years. So it remains to be seen whether that, in fact, will have any impact.
Let's talk about the impact of zero-rated VAT items. If we were to increase those, would it change anything, particularly for the cost of living of those that are most affected by this VATing or VAT overall?
Okay, I come from Kandla, right? That's where I come from. So I did a very basic, study, comparing prices from where I live in Johannesburg, in the suburbs, right? Compared prices in Johannesburg, where I buy bread, right, every day. Compared that to a person who is in Soweto and compared that to a person who is in Kandla, right? The bread is cheaper where I buy it from than where a person in Kandla buys from and a person in Soweto buys from, right?
So the aggregate price that you've seen is ultimately that
of course.
In the more affluent areas, it's actually cheaper.
It's actually cheaper. And the reason being is that I'm for importation of ideas, right, from the developed world. Where it could work. The concept of zero rating the items in order to alleviate, the prices for the poor. But the reality is, does it work in the South African context? And the reality is that, in my view, it doesn't work. And the reason being is that the poor doesn't buy bread from a regulated environment, i.e. regulated shops. Because in Kandla, in the rural area where you and I come from, is that the person who sells the bread in the community, in fact, buys the bread from regulated shops, and they put a margin and markup, right? And obviously bread would cost the poor person even more than you know, the person that, you know, that earns a living, right? So the concept doesn't work in our environment,
So what's
in
the
an
solution
unregulated
then?
environment.
So what's the solution? If it's not to increase the number of zero-rated VAT items, as you made that example, which is very stark and very clear, though, how do we fix it then? How else do we alleviate the pressure?
The solution is clear. So don't import ideas that don't work for our environment, right? First, test it. There is no empirical evidence that it works. It's all anecdotal, right?
Sure.
The basis for zero rating the items is anecdotal. There's no empirical evidence that it works. So the solution is clear. Collect the tax, right?
Yeah.
Put the 15% on all items, and then empower the people with additional income in order for them to be able to buy.
There would be
and the other view is that to even poor people know what is in the basket of zero-rated items, right? Do poor people are they not eager to even have items that are not in the basket, right? I mean, some of the items, it's soya beans. Have you gone to a house where you eat soya beans? I've never been.
No.
Right?
No.
But when I go to poor people, they would serve me, you know, chicken.
Yes.
And they would also envy to have chicken.
Itself is not zero-rated.
Of course.
So does this mean then, in your example and what you're suggesting, doing away with zero-rated VAT items and then ultimately empowering people through the collection of that?
Of course.
Things like the SRD grant would increase?
No, of course. So increase the buying power for the poor people by collecting the VAT and giving them more money to be able to spend.
Yeah.
Because they don't spend on the items that are in the basket. Because no human being should be constrained to a particular basket, and they 100%. Don't even know, right?
100%.
Of course.
How do we get South Africa growing from here, do you think? If I could ask you a broader question. Because at this point, it feels like we're tussling and asking ourselves how we get more money, how we fix, but we're not speaking about the fundamentals here. People need jobs. They want more money, of course, to be able to buy the things that they really need on their day-to-day.
Yeah. I think, for me, the great thing that has happened is the GNU.
Yeah.
Right? Because it has enabled the ANC, or the governing party, to be able to introspect, self-introspect, right? And not to take decisions that serve their own interest. But decisions are now being monitored.
Yes.
And that's why we have this impasse on the VAT rate increase. If we didn't have a GNU and we didn't have the outcome of the last elections, I mean, the 2% that was initially announced by the minister would have still passed, you know, through, and it would have happened. You and I would have been paying VAT at 17%.
Yeah.
But the fact that now you've got opposing views, you know, that bring some sense of sanity on the table, it's a good thing. And obviously, when we get to that position that the government is efficient in terms of how it conducts its own business, I think then you will see the great fruits that will come from that.